Hey y'all, welcome to our fourth week of our online meeting space for FCC Youth. We have a visitor this morning, and so I hope that you can go along with me on this one. We're going to see how it works out, but he wanted to hang out with us today. So we're going to be in the book of Mark again. We're continuing on, and this week we're going to be in chapter 7, and we're going to talk a little bit about tradition. So I had a few questions for you guys this morning. First, what are some traditions that you guys have? What do you love to do? Is Christmas a tradition? Is Thanksgiving a tradition? What do you have? Let me know in the comments, text me, or talk to me on Wednesday when we meet for youth group. Another question I have, it's a would you rather question. You ready for it, Hudson? Hudson's ready. All right, would you rather give up your whole Thanksgiving meal but still be able to open presents on Christmas, or give up all of your Christmas presents and not be able to eat on Thanksgiving? What do you think, Hudson? What would you rather do?
Don't eat on Thanksgiving.
Don't eat on Thanksgiving. Hudson wants his Christmas presents. I think I'm with him on this one. I mean, I really like Thanksgiving food, but I can wait a few weeks and eat some good food on Christmas and get cool presents. I'm about that life. Let me know what you think in the comments. Text me, or let's talk about it Wednesday. Sorry for that little delay. We're going to jump back into the gospel reading in chapter 7. So open up your Bibles if you have them, or your apps if you have them. We're going to be in the Gospel of Mark, chapter 7. And I'm going to read from verses 1 through, 1 through 7. And then I'm going to skip down and we're going to start on verse 14 and go through 15, okay? So follow along if you've got your Bibles with you, starting in verse 1. Now the Pharisees and some of the experts in the law who came to Jerusalem gathered around him. And they saw that some of Jesus' disciples ate their bread with unclean hands. That is, they didn't wash them. For the Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they perform a ritual washing, holding fast to the tradition of the elders. And when they come from the marketplace, they do not eat unless they wash. They hold fast to many other traditions, the washing of cups, pots, kettles, and dining couches. The Pharisees and the experts in the law asked him, "Why do your disciples not live according to the tradition of the elders? They eat with unwashed hands." And Jesus said to them, "Isaiah prophesied correctly about you hypocrites, as it is written. These people honor me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. They worship me in vain, teaching as doctrine the commandments of men." We're going to skip down to verse 14. Then he called the crowd again and said to them, "Listen to me, everyone, and understand. There is nothing outside of a person that can defile him by going into him. Rather, it is what comes out of a person that defiles him." Sorry for another interruption. We have lost our cuteness factor. He is out running in the backyard. He has left me here to fend on my own. So we are going to continue on and push through and continue with this lesson. So I want to talk a little bit about tradition and why it's important and what it means to us. And I think to start, we're going to skip back. We're going to talk about a story that we talked about a few weeks ago. Hopefully this will jog your memory a little bit. So Jesus and the disciples are in the grain fields on the Sabbath, and they're picking grain, which is a no-no on the Sabbath. You're not supposed to do anything. It's a day of rest. And similarly to this story, the Sadducees and the Pharisees come and they point out what Jesus and the disciples are doing wrong. And Jesus's response is, well, God didn't make man for the Sabbath. He made Sabbath for man. And basically what Jesus is saying here is that there's nothing that man can do for the Sabbath. It doesn't make sense to think about it in those terms. But what does make sense is to think about Sabbath as something that is healthy, as something that is meaningful and life-giving for those who participate in it. And I think this is kind of a view that we can have of tradition. It's a helpful way to think about it. That traditions can help move our hearts, that they can help change our minds, and they can help give us life, right? I think about traditions during Christmas and Thanksgiving And they're meaningful because they bring us into community with each other. They bring us laughter and joy with our families and our friends. But traditions become less meaningful when all they are words or guidelines or rules to be shown that some people are in and some people are out. And that's what seems to be happening here in this text, that the Sadducees and the Pharisees are, like the prophecy said, honoring God with their lips. They're doing the right things, they're going through the motions, but their hearts are far from God. They worship in vain. Their teachings and their doctrines are commandments, but ultimately they're just commandments of men because they're not doing anything to really change hearts and to give life, right? And that's not to say that these traditions are bad. Jesus doesn't say, don't wash your hands. Jesus knows that these traditions are good. Jesus comes out of the Jewish tradition where these things are celebrated. Christianity is all tied up within these traditions. And so it's important for us to think about them, but to also think about them with a grain of salt, saying that it's not the traditions that make us, it's us that make traditions. I think about traditions like, baptism and communion and things that we do every week during church, right? I'm missing a whole lot of traditions right now. I'm missing seeing everybody in the welcoming and gathering area. I'm missing Sunday school class in person. And these are traditions that give us life and are meaningful for us. So my encouragement to you today is to think about these traditions in your life. Think about those things that are meaningful to you, the things that have been passed down in your families. Maybe that's donuts on a Saturday morning. That's something I did growing up. My grandpa would bring us donuts every Saturday, and that was a meaningful tradition. But if I ever was like, well, their family doesn't do that, so they can't be worshiping the same way I do, that would be wrong of me, right? That wouldn't be in the spirit of tradition. That would be in the spirit of self-service, of making myself look better than somebody else because I'm doing something they're not. Sorry about that. I had a little knock at the door, and so hopefully we can make it through the rest of this video without any more interruptions, and we'll jump right back into it. So we were talking about tradition and the idea that tradition is something that ultimately brings us together, that gives us joy, and that changes hearts and minds. Tradition gives life. And what the Sadducees and the Pharisees are naming as tradition, they're not naming for the sake of giving life and to change hearts and minds. They're naming to point out that somebody else is doing it wrong. And that defeats the purpose of tradition, right? And so I hope that as we go through this week and think about the traditions that we have, maybe that we've lost in recent weeks, that we can notice what those traditions are doing for us, that we can pay attention to the ways that they've given us life. I miss the tradition of the gathering area, and I miss the tradition of meeting together in the same space. And these are all things that give me life. And so I hope that this week you can name some of those things in your own life. What's giving you life? And maybe think about, what are the ways that we've used traditions in the past to hurt others, to say that somebody isn't a part of something. I'm guilty of this. I know that it's a hard thing to do, to walk the line between, something so important to you and leaving somebody out, right? So that's my challenge to you this week. We have one more verse to look at really quick. We're going to skip down to verse 15. There is nothing outside of a person that can defile him by going into him. Rather, it's what comes out of a person that defiles them. So I think in this response, Jesus is saying that, it's not about the hand washing. It's not about these traditions that you either do or don't do. It's about what's in your heart. And for the Sadducees and for the Pharisees, their hearts were focused on what others weren't doing. And so I hope that we can focus our hearts on the things that matter, on the beauty of tradition, on people, on hearts. I think that's the point that Jesus is making here. That traditions are meaningful, sure, yeah, absolutely. And there are so many traditions in your life and in my life that I think can continue to be meaningful. But we always have to be aware of who is participating in those traditions with us and who isn't, and how we are thinking about those people still. I hope that we can find it in our hearts to find love for people, regardless of whether they practice the same traditions as we do. Um, that's what I've got for you this morning, y'all. I hope that you have a good week. I encourage you to think about the traditions in your life that are meaning making, that are life giving. And I hope that we can focus on our hearts a little bit too, on the ways that we are seeing the world around us and expecting the world to see us. Love you all. Blessings. Have a good week. I will see you on Wednesday, hopefully.